It's so beautiful to see all your faces. I've been chatting with a lot of you all morning. It's such a diverse crowd, people from different backgrounds, different profiles, different dreams. I think what all connects us is Vietnam or being Vietnamese. And I have a very simple core message before we get started with everything. And that is, it's a great time to be overseas Vietnamese. And you might ask, when was it not a good time to be overseas Vietnamese? We will hear from a few speakers why it's a good time for Vietnam. But I want to make that specific point that it's an interesting time to be overseas Vietnamese. And I talked to a lot of you. I can't speak for all of you, but I was not always someone who embraced my Vietnamese identity. I grew up in Germany. If you grew up Asian or Vietnamese elsewhere, sometimes you get a bit confused, you get a bit of different cultures in your life. Vietnamese at home, you go out there in school, people are different, behave different, your parents behave different, and so there's a bit of confusion. But the magic of this room is really that we can all relate to this, right? And how we define overseas Vietnamese is very loose. It's Vietnamese abroad. People have culture clash no matter whether they grew up overseas or whether they grew up in Vietnam and then go overseas. And we're all here today to connect and talk about one topic, and that is really the Vietnam opportunity. And we get different angles, different speakers on this later. Quickly on OV, many of you know me, but I basically started this community in 2019. Very simple purpose. I started this out of a very organic need for myself to meet with other Vietnamese peers, to have something like this, and now we have it. And just to help us connect and to thrive, right? Thrive really means professionally, personally. We say we're a community of Vietnamese professionals, and the professional aspect of it is the reason to connect. But what happens is naturally a lot of friendships, a lot of relationships, a lot of mentorships evolve from that. Yeah? And people connect so fast just on the fact that we are all sharing the common heritage. We have big plans with OV. We're going to launch our own platform and app this year. We're going to scale mentorship programs. We're going to host more meetups globally. We have 50 chapters right now. We try to establish New York, San Francisco, LA, London. Saigon is probably the most active, alongside Sydney and Melbourne, and San Francisco is very active as well. But one of the things we want to really establish is this annual homecoming summit, where you're all at right now. And we want to make this the occasion for Vietnamese to come back to Vietnam, to learn about the current state of Vietnam, to meet with peers who are on a similar journey of exploring moving back, and to talk to those who are already here. What we try to do this in the next couple of days is three things here. We learn about what is happening here, we connect with each other, and we belong to a group of peers that are very like us. Yeah? So your only job here is really to talk to a lot of people, overshare a little bit, say hi to more new faces, and you'll see people are very open to connect. We have a few things, and you'll have the full agenda in the WhatsApp group. Today is the conference to get you a bit of an update on what is happening in Vietnam. We have company tours with the theme of you getting to experience what it's like to work in Vietnam. And on the third day we have community, to let you know what it's like to be living in Vietnam. And I think we are all convinced on living in Vietnam. The challenge for most OV is more, what can I work, what can I do in Vietnam? We have various formats to explore that question. But I think all of us will want to live here actually. So let's make it happen for some of us. Again, it's a great time to be overseas Vietnamese, making that message again. Another message is, it's a great time to be here today with all of you. Yeah? Think about it, 200 plus overseas Vietnamese in one room, all in Ho Chi Minh City. How often do you get to have this, right? Maybe at Paris by night, but that's a different generation. We're the new one. It's wonderful to have you here. Let's enjoy this event together. I'll be in the middle and mingling with all of you. And let's do this. Quick thank you to the support partners that make this possible. Tech Comeback, our top talent partner. We generally love to work with them. They recruit a lot of overseas Vietnamese back, give them a very tangible way of integrating back, and have just fantastic job opportunities and roles within the company. And they're very, very ambitious of building a leading bank in this region. A few other names: McKinsey, Renova Cloud, Momo, and AWS, great partners that we have. And then before we launch in, just a quick video from our partner TechCobank and Renova. So let's enjoy that. I think the production is actually very good. So, okay. Can someone, hands up. Can you just click the play button? Just down. Just press the middle of the screen. More up. No, back. The mouse is set, yeah. Just click back. Okay, thank you. Wonderful. By the way, we have TechCobank here as well. They have a booth down here. The team flew in from Hanoi and they're very keen to talk to you. So just feel free to mingle with them. Next we have Renova Cloud.
Many AI projects never move forward. Limited tools and manual steps are slowing the team. No clear plan to move from POC to production. At Renova Cloud, we built the AI Factory, an AI accelerator to build and scale AI use cases on top of AWS. And at the core of this program is the Amazon Bedrock service, which helps us jump fast and build, deploy, and go to production in a short time, where we help you achieve your business objectives, moving from AI to ROI in a short time. That's the power of Renova AI Factory. Production-ready AWS solutions faster than ever.
Could we have Renova and AWS here as well, so if you're happy to speak to them, just go and find them. We get started with the intellectual parts. You try to move to the next slide. Sorry, this is not actually his job, but he just happens to sit there, so thanks, Kendall. He's a famous YouTuber, by the way, but seems very versatile in his skills. Can you press present top right? Perfect. Okay, before I get the first speaker on stage, can I just take a selfie with all of you while you're all seated so perfectly here? And yeah, can I just have you say cheese with me? Okay, 1, 2, 3, cheese! Cheese! Alright, it's gonna be online somewhere. Cool. Brooke, are you ready? Okay, we have 3 keynotes planned with 3 fantastic speakers. The first one is Brooke. He might do a quick intro himself. But he's at Vina Capital, wrote a book about Vietnam. He's not Vietnamese, but probably perhaps more Vietnamese than some of us. So yeah, Brooke, please come on stage.
Thanks, Greg. And welcome everyone, particularly those people that have travelled from overseas. I'm really, really impressed and excited about the opportunity to be able to talk to you about Vietnam and what's going on here today. Now, I noticed the parade of videos and I thought, hey, there's another really great video that you should watch to understand, particularly Global 2.0, produced by Vina Capital. Yep, good. All right, we're okay. Produced by Vina Capital last year, and maybe we'll try and get that shared as well, and maybe show it later in the day. Because it's not a pitch for Vina Capital, it's about talking about Global 2.0, which is a very, very important development in Vietnam these days. So, just a quick introduction. Yeah, my name is Phil Taylor, I'm the CEO of Vina Capital Asset Management. I moved to Vietnam in 1997. Do the maths, yeah, 29 years ago. My first visit with him was actually 1995, where I came to teach the first batch of Arthur Anderson graduates. I'm an accountant by training, and I started my career in New Zealand, came to Vietnam in 1995, again in 96 and moved to 97. I just saw the potential in this country from such an early time. It was only supposed to be 2 years, 2 years turned into 4 years, and 4 into 6, and then 3 children. My wife was New Zealand to 2. Right? So we brought up 3 children, we have never left, and we're still here, and we'll probably be here forever, because we love being here, I love to work here, it's a real purpose, it's extremely exciting what's going on in this country, and if you want to come back and contribute, you're more than welcome. So the title of my presentation today is Vietnam, Asia's Rising Star, which is actually the name of the book that I published 2 years ago on what is happening in Vietnam. But before we sort of go on stuff, there's no free lunches. I want to tell a little bit about Vina Capital. Vina Capital, for those of you that don't know the company, is one of the largest asset managers in the country. We manage about $3.8 billion across all asset classes. So it's not just public equities or fixed income, you do private equity, venture capital, infrastructure, and energy. That's what makes us different. We invest in everything in Vietnam. Wherever there's an opportunity, and people want to give us money to manage on their behalf. We were set up in 2003, so 23 years ago. I should correct that. There's about 200 people in our firm, both in Ho Chi Minh City and in Hanoi. Our product, if you're interested, for those in Europe, you can buy our UCITS fund. Or you could buy our listed company on the London Stock Exchange, which is a closed-end listed fund. Or as foreigners or as locals here, you can actually invest in our mutual fund products, which are available to subscribe to online or through all the major banks, including Techcombank, by the way. But if you're already a Techcombank customer, you can buy our mutual fund products already. So on from my marketing pitch. So what is this book about? Okay, so the hypothesis of the book is that Vietnam is going to grow like the other Asian tigers of East Asia, particularly South Korea and Taiwan, in a way similar to how they grew when they were roaring tigers running ahead. And the conclusion, you don't have to buy the book to see the conclusion. It's not about where we get the conclusion, it's about how we get there and why we get there. That's discussed in the book. But our conclusion conclusion is that Vietnam is a tiger economy already today. So whenever the media says it's trying to be a tiger economy, it's not. It's already a tiger economy. Let's lock that in. But also that it will probably grow in a similar way to South Korea and Taiwan, when they grew as tiger economies. Now, of course, the question that obviously comes up here is that why South Korea and Taiwan? Right? Why are we comparing Vietnam to Thailand or Indonesia, which is so often compared with? And we're going to talk about the reasons for that later on, because there are many differences between Vietnam and those countries. So why do we write the book? Okay, so firstly it was for my co-author is Sam Cosmo. He's American, that's lived in Vietnam a similar period of time to me. And first we wanted to understand ourselves. What's going on in Vietnam? Why has the transformation over the last 20 years occurred? And where is it going from here? Look at that chart up on the top right. In the last 25 years, we all know the statistic, GDP has gone from, when I moved here, it was $230 per person. Now it's about $4,500 per person. So GDP has gone up significantly. But what most of you might not realize, and I think it's even more important, is the poverty rate has gone from 53% down to about 2%. That's probably lower than most Western countries, right? The poverty rate is only about 2%. And that is actually one of the key drivers of the economy, the strange way. We'll talk about that later on. Now, the other thing, if you look at that chart on the bottom, and I'm sorry, I love to build slides with lots of information on it, which means you might not be able to read it all, but hopefully the organisers will share it with you later on. But that chart at the bottom, that's out of a report from PwC in 2017. And what it says is that by 2050, Vietnam will be the 14th largest economy in the world. Now, that always struck me as incredible because for most people, Vietnam is perceived to be a poor, small country. But it's going to be the 14th largest economy in the world. This is what it is. 20th largest economy in the world by 2050. Get to the 14th. 20th largest economy. Why? That makes it a G20 country, right? That's a prestigious group of the largest economies in the world, and Vietnam is heading in that direction, and it will be part of those. And the reason we know it's going to be part of it is it's about growth, of course. But actually, if you project past 2050, it's actually going to be about the 14th largest economy in the world. That's where my 14th comes from, okay? That is, a lot of this is mathematics, okay? Population very large, GDP growing, age of the population, all of these factors can make this hurdle very, very predictable. So we're talking about a country that's going to be a G20 country by 2050, and one of the most important and largest economies in the world. So we want to know whether Vietnam can actually get there. So anyway, that's why Sam and I want to know. The second group was for foreigners. In my time in Vietnam, I meet a lot of people coming to Vietnam, learning about Vietnam for the first time. Maybe investors, maybe students. I talked to a lot of student classes as well. And what struck me was that many people come to Vietnam with misconceptions about the country. Now, things like communism and the role of communism in a country, or in Vietnam's case, post-war country, right? These factors, while, let's say, had an impact on the country 20, 30, 40 years ago, they're no longer relevant. Vietnam has changed significantly from those days 20 or 30 years ago. And so somebody needs to explain to visitors coming to Vietnam, what is contemporary Vietnam? What is the country that we're in today? And how can you understand it better? And dismiss many of those misconceptions that we had before, right? And then the third constituency that we wrote the book for was for Vietnamese. Most Vietnamese do not know where the country is headed. They don't really think about it. They actually don't think beyond Tet next year, right? That's just a thing. After Tet, I'll do this. That's how people think. But if you think 10, 20 years, it's really important for people in this country to understand the trajectory. Where is this country going? Because that's why they can plan their lives better. We give them a better understanding and confidence about what's happened in the past. What's happened in the past is not luck. The things that have happened in the past, there is structure, and I'll explain that to you, to show you, if you reinforce this idea that Vietnam is on this incredible growth trajectory. So what I want to do is talk about some of these misconceptions, right? So the first misconception, this gets to this point of South Korea and Taiwan. The first misconception is Vietnam is a Southeast Asian country. Now that might sound a little bit strange to you, but yeah, geographically it is in Southeast Asia and we can't dispute that. But culturally, it is Northeast Asia. It is culture, and I'm saying that culture is far more powerful in terms of moving an economy forward, growing an economy, than geographically where a country is. Geography is important, I'm going to talk about that in a moment, but in different contexts. But if you're thinking about which countries are similar to Vietnam, it's actually not Thailand, it's not Indonesia, it's actually Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and of course, big brother China, right? Because we all know the history. If you don't know the history of Vietnam, read it, because it's very, very important. I tell people when students visiting, if you go and visit the country, make sure you read about its history, because that's where its culture comes from, right? And everything in society is driven by culture. So Vietnam is, colloquially, they often refer to these countries as the chopstick nations, right? I haven't put on my slide, but these are the countries in Asia that use chopsticks. Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, China, Vietnam, and Singapore, okay. I guess we get it there. But not every country. Thailand does not use chopsticks, right? So, why is this important? Well, Confucian society. Confucianism is far more important to Vietnam than religion, for example. It's those values that hold the society together. And we know what's important, what Confucianism considers important. Education, hard work, loyalty to family, civil society and structure. All of these things Vietnam has in common with the countries of Northeast Asia. If you look at countries in Southeast Asia, it's far less obvious. By the way, I did live in Thailand for 2 years, so I can make some of that comparison as well. So when I talk to investors about Vietnam, I say, look, don't think about Vietnam as competing with the countries in Southeast Asia. It's very easy to get into that discussion. Vietnam's not competing with the countries of Southeast Asia. It's racing to catch up to the countries of Northeast Asia, right? That's the future of the country. It got left behind in the last wave of Asian tigers, but now it's racing to catch up with South Korea and Taiwan. And that's a much more exciting future, obviously, for all of us to consider. So that's the first misconception. The second one to talk about is the structure, is the idea that the structure is completely random and not planned. I would agree the government probably hasn't got a great plan in place. In fact, they're getting it together, particularly under Dollar. Very, very interesting guy. But actually, what's been going on in Vietnam for the last 20 years is actually an economic development model that is actually replicating what has happened in other countries in the past. So what the chart on the left shows is that all through history, countries have gone through accelerated periods of growth, right? Even the United States, as early as that. But I've also highlighted Taiwan and South Korea as well, where countries grow at such a pace that they fall through the middle income trap and become permanently rich countries, right? We call that sort of the industrialization, not in the economic sense, but the economy modernizes and grows in trade, education levels go up, standards of living increase, poverty goes down. All of those things happen. Urbanization is another factor that we see. So all of these things contribute to this growth. And that's the path that Vietnam is on. Now, it's not totally random. This is a model that we drew in conjunction with the book to try and sort of lay it out in simple terms. But this is the East Asia development. It's called. It's an economic concept, understood, written by someone much smarter than me. But it shows how you use the country's resources to grow the economy to become permanently rich. Let me go through this very, very quickly. I know I'm going to struggle for time to do this, but what you think about in terms of Vietnam's development, the only asset they had was people, right? The agriculture, nothing else really developed. And they said, well, what are we going to do? We're going to bring in foreign manufacturers, right? We need to bring in capital, right? So the capital was provided by the private sector, foreign direct investment in state-owned enterprises, so was the expertise. On top of that, they bolted on 16 trade agreements with international other countries. So whatever was produced in the country could be exported to other markets. And that's, of course, we all know the success story that manufacturing has been in Vietnam. If you look at the byproduct of this, focus on this. On the left-hand side is the standard of living. The product of this model is that the standard of living goes up and poverty goes down. That's that first KPI that I had on that earlier slide. Now the second KPI is the GDP per capita, and that's the one on the right-hand side, right? So that's how the model pieces together with that chart that I put on those very, very early slides. And the important thing is this is sustainable, right? What is happening now, right now, you can say, oh, we can't become rich manufacturing footwear and garments. No, you can't. But the success of the model is that you move up the high tech. You manufacture more and more sophisticated products. That's why Samsung, that's why Apple, that's why all these other tech companies are moving to Vietnam. But they're still applying the same model. Low cost of labor, access to capital, bringing technology and expertise, and grow the economy. The other thing that's absolutely hidden in this is localization. You have to have more stuff made in Vietnam feeding into those manufacturers. And that, of course, happens over time. Right. The third misconception I want to talk about, I think it's a little bit controversial, but it's the idea of this single-party state versus multi-party states. But I think it's a very relevant topic these days. I don't use the word communism. I think it's got a bad rap, right? It's a single-party state. That's what Vietnam is. And this idea that, you have to be a democracy to be a rich country. I don't think that's true. Firstly, there's a chart on the left-hand side that on the bottom, the vertical is GDP per capita. On the bottom, it's democracy index, basically. Whether you have an autocracy or whether you have a full democracy, right? And you can see on this, there are many countries that are close to autocracies that are very rich. Now, many of them are rich because they have resources. That's always the exception when it comes to economic countries. But many of them are very, very rich and they don't have resources. Singapore, Hong Kong, both very, very rich, not really democracies, right? In fact, the question is, if you look at this, as I said, we've been brought up in the West and told, and this is what I was told, I don't know if you were told this, but I was told that to be rich you had to be a democracy. But I wonder, if you look at that chart, I can see the correlation. It's actually whether the question is not, are they democracies because they are rich? Right? It's not they're rich because they're democracies. They're democracies because they are rich. And in fact, if you think about this, South Korea and Taiwan were not democracies when they were tiger economies. They were single-party states. And in fact, when you think about this, you're a business manager and so on. If you think about business strategy, you want to think medium to long term. You can't have your government changing all the time. This is about setting in place the ability to execute a strategy for the growth of the country. And I think the really important point on the slide is that last, it's not on this version, I'll take it out in some audiences, but I would say, a phrase I use, the legitimacy of the one-party system in Vietnam is built on creating prosperity for everyone. So in the old days, the one-party system was very much oppressive. That's why communism has a bad rap. And look at some of these countries like North Korea. It's oppressive. There's no doubt there's no place in this world for things like that. But in Vietnam's case, the legitimacy of the one-party system is built on making people prosperous. And this is the main driver of growth in this country today. It's actually the same as what happened in Singapore, right? Singapore has been a one-party state longer than Vietnam has been unified. The one-party state since 1963, right? And look at the wealth and prosperity created by that country. So anyway, we can dismiss this idea about multi-party states. We can just say we've got a good government, so having the right government with the right policies, that's the most important. So anyway, there's enough on the time. So, going on. One of the things we did in Vietnam Asia's Rising Star was to think about, well, what are those drivers of growth? One thing for me, dealing with investment, I never felt totally comfortable with the economist's view of growth and how countries succeed, let's say. Apologies to any economists, there are some, but to me, a lot of the research that we did in the book is really anecdotal. It's things like, for example, I used the idea of culture before. Culture is a major driver of economic growth. Different countries have different cultures, and it plays out very, very differently on how people are motivated to work and produce and work together as a team, those sorts of things. But I'm going to talk about some of these. You can see one of the drivers I've included. Sorry, we grouped them by two groups. The first group is the drivers that we identified at South Korea and Taiwan. And we said, does Vietnam have those drivers? So some of those drivers, priority to education, post-war growth, these are the same as South Korea and Taiwan, right? When they were economies. We'll talk about some of these others. Now the other one is the group that the cards that we said Vietnam has that Taiwan and South Korea do not have. So there are even more positives, more drivers in Vietnam than those countries had. And one of those drivers, that's what I was going to get to, is the Vietnamese diaspora, you guys, right? The ability to be able to call on you to come back and contribute to this country, which is very, very important because I'm sure you're all very well educated and have all got something to give back to this country and the community. So I'll talk about some of these very quickly. But I think when you take off these, this gives you, even though economic models and so on are a little bit complicated and fuzzy, if you start to look at this anecdotal information, you say, yeah, this is going to work. So the one I'd like to talk about is geography. Now I did say geography wasn't totally relevant where the country is located, but actually what your country looks like has a big impact on economic growth. So let's compare Vietnam with the country on the left, Indonesia. Because many, many people compare Vietnam with Indonesia. When you're talking to investors, the investors are saying, do I put it in Indonesia, do I put it in Vietnam? If I'm building a factory, do I put it in Vietnam, or do I put it in Indonesia? It's often compared. Well, let's think about this. This country, Vietnam, is one landmass. Everybody in the country, 90% of the population is in one ethnic group, right? And everybody speaks Vietnamese. You contrast it with this country over here, Indonesia, you have 300 million people residing on 15,000 islands, speaking 1,000 languages, and there's 1,300 ethnic groups. How do you unify a country like that? How do you get everybody rich together? How can you avoid making some people rich in one place and the other people on the small islands stay poor? That creates instability, right? The Gini coefficient. That's a big problem. You can't be a rich country if not everybody is rich, right? In that sense. Or you don't give everyone the opportunities. If you're thinking about manufacturing as well, think about it. You put your factory on one of the small islands. Once the labour cost becomes too expensive, you've got to move it. When you move to the next island, it's not like just moving to another location. You're literally moving to another country when it comes to culture and language and practices and practices. In Vietnam, when it becomes too expensive to manufacture in Vietnam, you move to Nha Trang, right? And everybody moves with it if they want to keep working for you. Right? That's mobility around labour. It doesn't exist in Indonesia. And then you think about infrastructure. How do you give everybody in Indonesia access to electricity, telecommunications, and clean water? Very, very difficult. But you can do it. It's going to cost 4 or 5 times more per unit than in Vietnam. So this geography is very, very important. China is the other one to consider. Now, China's been a huge success story, but actually, if you look at China closely, all of the wealth is on the East Coast, right? The West is very poor. That's why China developed the Belt and Road Initiative, right? It's because they need to make the people in the West richer, right? It's the eastern seaboard that is the wealth. No surprise, the eastern seaboard is about the same distance north to south, and the same width, east to west, as Vietnam is. Right? It's just the same eastern seaboard, moved geographically south. That's wonderful when you think about it from a manufacturing and growth point of view. So Vietnam is actually quite blessed in terms of shape of country, even though when I first started to come to Vietnam, I thought, how can you rule a country that is long and narrow like that? But it's very blessed because we have ports access. So anyway, let's just go on. Another driver is the role of women. That's not perfect, but relative to most countries in the world, there are very few barriers for women participating fully in the economy. Think about the countries, particularly some of the neighbouring countries, where women are essentially discriminated against because of religion or culture. Right? These are major barriers to economic growth. When 50% of your population does not have the right to fully contribute to growing the country. In Vietnam, as I admit, it's not perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than most countries. And the chart on the left shows the engagement of women in the workforce. It shows there's only one country that's of a reasonably large economy that has more female participation in the workforce, and that's Sweden. Right? So very, very high participation rates. And look, if you think about the total workforce in Vietnam, it's bigger than the entire population of South Korea. And it's about the same size as the workforce as Japan, which Japan's of course shrinking. It's just a little bit bigger in terms of workforce. So this is an enormous workforce. So it was considerable. Demographics, and this is more economic talk, but obviously lots of young people. This is fueling consumption growth and will turbocharge the economy for the next 10 years because the young wealth being created and people getting jobs and so on. We're going to move this up pretty quickly because I know we've got no time. Very quickly, urbanisation, I mentioned this before. This is what interesting when I use when I talk to investors. I think, you think, again, you're taught overseas that investing in emerging and frontier countries is risky. But actually, what I like about investing in Vietnam is we can predict the future. Right? What I mean by that is that chart on the top left, that's the urbanisation rate. Compares Vietnam's urbanisation rate, the number of people living in the cities, those rural communities, with other countries in the area. Now, the urbanisation rate in Vietnam is about 38%, right? But in China, you can see it's up at 60%. So more and more people are moving into the cities. When I moved to Vietnam in 2007, there were 4 million people in Ho Chi Minh City. Now, after the merger, it's 18 million people, the merger of Vina. And we know, reliably, because of this phenomenon, that there's going to be 25 to 30 million people in Ho Chi Minh City in about 15 years. This is going to be a mega city. There's plenty of land out there that needs to be developed to attract people to live. But when you think about that from an investment point of view, that's a very important investment thing where this is the sort of thing that Vina Capital thinks about, where would we invest? Hospitals, schools, convenience stores, apartment buildings, furniture manufacturers, modern retail, all of this stuff is going to continue to grow in Vietnam because of the urbanisation rate. But of course the other benefits of urbanisation are better healthcare standards, higher levels of education and so on. So this is very, very important. Now, so if we project forward, we want to keep it simple to see if Vietnam is going to cross the middle income trap and become a permanently rich country. If you take the simple numbers, what we did is we took the growth rate for the last 20 years, and the last 20-year average growth rate is 6.23%. So if you project that forward, you can see Vietnam becomes high income in about 2043, which is still some way off, but we're on the good path. We put some sensitivities there as well. Bear in mind, this is quite important, last year the growth rate was 8%. And the government has announced they want 10% growth this year and for the rest of every year for the rest of the decade. So this move to high income may be sooner than we can expect. If the government can execute Doi Moi 2.0, which is a lot of discussion about, maybe someone else will talk about. So this is the trajectory. Within I think the next 12 to 15 years, Vietnam will become high income, and then we need to, the important thing is staying high. That's where the drivers are important. Many countries become high income and then fail. Russia and Brazil, very good examples of that. Right? But anyway, we won't get too much into this. Now, but what can go wrong? I just talked about the good stuff. We're not going to go into detail much, so I'll go through some of them. We wrote about all of these in the book, and I talked about, and the one on the top of the list is state capacity. Having the right people in the right places, making the right decisions for our society, right? And what we had as a concern a couple of years ago, I have to say my concern level is much lower today. The recent reforms announced under Doi Moi 2.0 are extremely exciting, very, very positive for this country. It shows that the country has the right people driving the country forward at the moment. And actually I have a lot of interaction with a lot of the people involved in these decisions and policy making, and it does impress me how far we've come in such a short time. Of course, there's a lot more to happen, but this issue about state capacity has been addressed quite significantly over the last couple of years through what we've seen announced. Corruption is a problem, but I haven't got a chance yet. I'll actually show you that corruption levels are declining. And in fact, Vietnam is in the top 50% of countries in terms of Transparency International's corruption perceptions of it. So it's not as bad as more than 50% of the other countries. Right? And it's getting better. It's the direction of travel that's so important. When I go through these, the aging demographics is the one that's the most sensitive. This is why the government has announced fast levels of growth, 10% per year, right? Because we must get rich before we get old. China is getting old. It's not permanently rich. Thailand is becoming old now. We just crossed the hurdle. I can't remember the definitions, but it's aging faster than it's growing. This is a big problem. Vietnam is like 10 years ago. That's why you've got to come back and help them grow at 10%. They grow. Because they have to grow at 10% a year, not 6%, to avoid the aging. Look on for this. Look, it's interesting. Free trade reversal didn't pick Trump's Liberation Days. That's in the book 2 years ago. Right? So these things are there. Now I think I've got one more slide. I was asked for a group a year ago. There's a group of students in Vietnam, university students. Well, make it more practical. Talk about what will Vietnam look like in 2045. What's something really tangible we can look at? And then we sort of thought about it and came up with this list, just to give some real resonance to it. Now I'm going to talk through a couple of these. The Olympics, right? We wrote in, this is written in the book. We talked about Vietnam hosting the Olympics in about 2054 or so. Why? Because there's two types of countries that host the Olympics. Large rich countries and emerging countries that want to announce their presence on the world stage. If you look at Japan, it was in 1964. If you look at China, 2008, South Korea, 1988, I think it was, they all hosted the Olympics to tell the world they have arrived. And I think Vietnam is one of the only countries in the world that has the potential to do that again sometime in the next 10 to 20 years. So they may be hosting the Olympics, but look at some of this other stuff. Epoch is a number one hit. Global number one hit. Actually, again, if you think about it for the last 6 months or so, there seems to be this emergence of Vietnamese music coming through at an international level. The other one is the Vietnamese movie wins an Oscar. That's another thing in the last year. We've seen, Vietnamese movies on Netflix now. That's not just in Vietnam, that's in other markets as well. It's being translated. Culture is being split. This is what happens as your economy becomes richer. You export your culture, right? Banh mi and pho available in all the major cities around the world today. They weren't there 20 years ago, right? Well, except in the Vietnamese neighborhoods. Now they're going to Melbourne, the Tet. There's banh mi shops everywhere. I said to someone, this is crazy. There's schnitzel, banh mi. You don't get that in Vietnam. But it's adapted. The culture is being exported as the country becomes richer. The world culture is defined by rich countries. And we're going to see Vietnamese culture spreading even more. And the last one, the Vietnamese football team playing the World Cup finals. Okay? Well, the women's team already has. I do apologize. The men's team will play the World Cup finals as well. So say, well, is that achievable? Well, let's think about that. There is one country that's already done that, right? K-pop, Gangnam Style, K-pop, right? The Olympics, South Korea hosted the Olympics. Vietnamese movie won a top Oscar. Parasite came from South Korea, won top movie at the Oscars, right? And of course, the Korean men's football team has played in the World Cup finals probably every year for the last 20 years, or every 4 years. And they hosted the World Cup finals about 12 years ago, right? So actually, South Korea has done most of those things. And I think you can see how, from the cultural point of view, the influence of South Korea on Vietnam and other countries is very, very obvious. So I think that's very, very exciting. I hope you find that interesting. That's my predictions for 2045. I hope you hold me to it. That's it. Last pitch. If you do want to read the book, you can get them here. It's hard to find in the bookshelves, so I've got some issues with my publisher, but you can buy it online. It's on Kindle, and there's a very good website locally where you can buy both the English and Vietnamese editions if you're interested in buying that. So.
Let's take one question. We're quite flexible, actually. Anyone has a question to our Mr. Brook?
One question, please.
Let me walk over to you.
Thank you for presenting this. This is very insightful. Just wanted to get your thoughts. Where do you think the education system in Vietnam needs to be in order to get to the goals that we aspire to achieve?
I think this is one of the real challenges that exists in the country today. If you look at, I do have a separate slide I can put up today on the education. If you look at K-12, the education levels in Vietnam are very high, right? The problem where it is weak is at university. And a lot of it's got to do with the way that university administration wants to control the syllabus, and it's not positive. I think this is a big reason why so many families choose to send their children overseas, right? And it's unfortunate, if anything, but it's beneficial because a lot of those children go overseas, are educated, work overseas, and come back and bring those skills. And we see that increasingly happening as well. In fact, because of the issues around the university level education, we find in the returning Vietnamese for our own company more equipped for the modern Vietnam today. And so the vast majority of our staff are actually overseas educated. That's not acceptable, but it's the solution today. I think the government is trying to respond in some areas, like for example the high-tech sector. They recognise the need to focus on engineering and other more sophisticated sciences and so on. I think that's an area where actually the education system can respond if there's enough places. But some other fields, there's issues.
Let's take one more over here.
Hi, to piggyback about education and university, do you think Vietnam will become a country at any point that can have like universities that can attract international students, like how the US have universities that attract talents around the world?
Yeah, look, there are universities already. RMIT, for example, is already attracting international students. But that's connected with an Australian university, and it's part of a cultural experience and an international experience for those international students that come back. I do think that Hanoi University or National University and Ho Chi Minh City University can become, for example, top 100 in the world. They're not there yet, but I think that will happen over time. It's a natural progression. There's plenty of smart Vietnamese educators around the world in universities. There's no shortage of Vietnam internet and smart people and also overseas. But we've got to attract them back, and we've got to create the right environment for people to do that. So it will grow, but it'll be slow. I don't think there's a lot of opportunities.
Bro, thank you so much. We gotta move on. Give it up for Bro, please. Thank you. I think one sentence stuck with me, and that is, we gotta get rich before we get old. I love how that is true on an individual level, but now it's also true on a national level. I'm only 30, so not sure where this puts me, but Let's get rich. Alright.